Okay, we're about a minute after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. My name is Bradley Martin with Kindful, and we're really excited to have Sandy Rees with us today to cover a really awesome topic around nurturing your donors. Right? I think this is a topic that we're always excited people to give us different perspectives on because I think it's just as much of an art as it is a science, and there's a lot of different perspectives. And hopefully, if you can take away just a few nuggets today on how you can better build deeper relationships with your constituents, that's awesome. So, a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get too far into the content here. So, number one is we really want today's topic and webinar to be as interactive as possible. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, just go over to your GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see down at the bottom, there should be a questions tab. Just expand that and just drop your questions in throughout the content. We probably won't be able to get to everyone's question, but I'll be monitoring those as Sandy's talking, and I'll interrupt her every now and then, and we'll jump in with a question if we see one coming through, or several that are similar. In addition to that, we will be sharing a recording of the webinar after the webinar. So, if you're a feverish note taker, you obviously can take notes, but if you want to wait and take, get the webinar afterwards and just really consume the content, you feel welcome to do that. And then lastly, make sure you stay to the end. We've already uploaded the handout at the bottom. You'll see the handouts section under questions where you can download the handout from today's webinar that only those that are attending are going to be getting. So if you're watching the webinar, you won't be getting the handout. Secondly, we are doing a poll at the end, and we're going to give away 2 tickets to Sandy's event coming up in August. And so she'll have more information about that, but make sure you stay to the end if you're interested in grabbing those tickets or being entered into getting those tickets. So those are my housekeeping notes. Sandy, I'm going to let you take it from here. But first off, we're really happy you're willing to do this with us, and thanks for coming today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting. And hey, everybody, happy Tuesday afternoon from wherever that you're joining us from. I'm so glad that you're here. I know that there's so many other things you could be doing with this time, and I'm excited that you're here. I'm going to try to give you some really practical ideas that you can use right away to go nurture your donors. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about that today. But first, I want to make sure that you're in the right place. You are in the right place if you really want to raise money, but maybe building donor relationships seems a little manipulative. I know for some of my clients and the folks that I work with, that can happen sometimes. Maybe you just have no idea where to start, and you've had this idea, you've heard this before. Yes, we need to be building relationships, but I don't have any idea where to start. How do I use my donor software? What do I need to do? Or maybe you have an idea of what to do, but you just don't have a lot of time to spend on nurturing donors. That's usually what I hear from my folks, but I'm curious, for those of you who are here, which one of these best describes you? So Bradley's going to launch a poll, and you're going to get a chance to participate with us and tell us if any of these feel like they kind of describe you. Whether it's building donor relationships seems kind of manipulative, you have no idea where to start, or you just don't have a ton of time to spend nurturing donors.
So you should be seeing that poll there pop up on your screen. Just go ahead and select which one and make sure you hit the submit button. And we'll give it just a few seconds here. We'll do this a couple times throughout the content, so to see how you compare to other people in the audience, and it's a good way to keep everybody engaged. So it looks like we've got about 60% of people have voted so far. So click back over, select which one best represents you, and we'll close the poll here in just a second.
I can't wait to see the results.
All right, we're going to go ahead and close it here. And you should see the results. So Sandy, does this surprise you?
Not at all. We have 17% building relationships seems manipulative, 28% of you have no idea where to start, and 56% say you just don't have a ton of time to spend on it. I'm not surprised at all. Most of us really wrestle with that issue of not enough time in the day. I was literally just having that conversation with somebody about 30 minutes ago. All right, well, thanks for everybody for sharing. That does give us an idea. That gives me an idea of some of the things that I want to make sure that we put a little more emphasis on. So here's what we are going to talk about today. We're going to talk about nurturing donors from 3 perspectives. One is integrating nurture with communications that you probably are already doing anyway, or if you're not doing, you should be doing. Then we're going to talk about segmentation. So if you're not doing much in the way of segmenting donors, you're really missing a big opportunity. So we're going to talk about different ways you can segment your donor base, your donor list, and why you might want to do that. Then we're also going to talk about major donors, because all of you should be working on this, even if your organization is pretty new and you're just getting started. But the real trick is, once you identify them, what do you do with them? And what about those that are not letting you know that they have deeper pockets? How do you find them? And what do you do to start pulling them closer to the organization? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. In terms of nurture. Now, I know that some of you are brand new. I was looking through the attendee list a minute ago, and I saw a couple of friends, hey, Les Fout, and some folks that I know are part of our Get Fully Funded family. But for those of you who are brand new to me, I want to give you a quick introduction. My name is Sandy Rees. I'm a fundraising coach and trainer. I've written a couple of books, love animals. This is my dog, Lucy. She's actually asleep in the floor next to me right now, and I hope she stays that way because she can be kind of barky. And here's my story. I was not born with fundraising skills. I know sometimes you come to a webinar like this and you think, oh man, these people know this stuff. They've always known this stuff. I was not. I also do not remember signing up for fundraising at Career Day. If you have a picture of you with a hairstyle like that, I want to see it. I remember falling into fundraising like everybody else at the time did in 1998. I had an opportunity to get involved with a local rescue mission and as a board member. And very soon they had a position that came open that I looked at and said, I think I can do that. So I quit my job. I was actually doing marketing for a corporate staffing company, quit that job, took the job at the rescue mission, and I never looked back. I knew that this was what I was supposed to be doing, was resource development. So I was there for about a year and then made a move over to the food bank. And that's when the skies opened and the angels sang. And I knew, like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And it raised a lot of money. Raised a lot of money in 5 years and completely turned around that fundraising program there. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot that I actually teach people today. And so actually some of the nurturing techniques that I'm going to share with you, I figured out the hard way. And that's what I can't stand. I can't stand to see anybody struggle or figure something out the hard way when I know there's an easier way, because I've done it. I've figured it out myself. So hopefully I can help shortcut the process for you a little bit. In 2005, I realized I'd become a little bit restless, and that's when I started Get Fully Funded. And today I get to spend my time doing really cool stuff like this, doing webinars for folks and teaching people shortcuts and different ways of thinking about it. And that's actually a shot from the Inspired Fundraising Retreat, I think 2 years ago. We'll tell you more about that later. Let's talk now about fundraising, because that's why we're here, right? You all have organizations with amazing missions that are changing lives out in the world. You just need more money so that you can do more good. In fact, that's one of the things that I base all my fundraising on, is that when you raise more money, you can change more lives. And that's what nonprofit is all about. It's all about doing something good, adding to the benefit of the community. So if you can change more lives when you raise more money, then it makes a lot of sense that we learn to do fundraising as well as we can. That's why you're here. That's why you're here, is to figure out what you can do in very, very practical terms that nurtures relationships. You already know fundraising is built on relationships. It is all about the connection that people feel with your organization. It's about how strongly they care about your cause and how much they want to see you succeed. So if we know that fundraising is built on relationships, then it makes sense that the stronger your relationships are, the more money you can raise. It's kind of like when you have a big loyal donor base of people who really care about what you're doing, you can turn that into a pile of money to help do the good that your organization needs to do. I tell people all the time, nobody has a big enough donor base. Well, there may be Harvard University, but for most of us, you need new donors. And for the donors that you already have, you have to do a really good job of taking care of them. And when you do that, everything changes. Let me take a breath for a minute, Bradley, and see if you want to add anything to that.
No, I mean, I think you're right. Like the thing that we talk about more than anything, the market kind of tells everyone that Kindful is a donor management system, right? But like I would really love to rebrand it as a donor relationship system, right? Like it's really what I've learned being in this space is that it's all about building relationships. And what I'm super excited to hear you talk about, and I think one of the things that we hear as a challenge for so many people is as they increase the size of their donor base, they feel like they actually struggle to keep those relationships feeling personal, right? Like, there's a point that you get to where it's great to go from a couple hundred donors to 10,000 donors, but how, when you get to that 10,000 donor mark, or, there's really a lot of donors, how do you continue to have really great relationships? So I'm really excited to hear kind of your take on some of those things.
Absolutely. That's a great point. There's a difference between building a relationship one-to-one and a relationship one-to-many. And a lot of people are doing one-to-many, but they're maybe not being as personal, and there are some tricks for that, and we'll circle back around to that in a minute. That's a great point. And it can be a little bit not just overwhelming, but you do start to lose that personal touch. So our job as fundraisers is to find a way to keep the interactions, keep the communications feeling as personal as possible, no matter how many people we're sending the communication to. And that's not always the easiest thing to do. Well, let's talk a little bit more about relationships. One of the things that I find is that a lot of people start feeling like building a relationship with a donor feels a little awkward and uncomfortable. It can feel manipulative. And people have even said to me, well, they know why I'm doing this, right? They know why I want to get to know them. They know that I'm going to ask them for money. And a lot of people do. But that shouldn't stop you from trying to reach out and make that connection anyway. And I think what we have to remember is that when we focus on the money, when it's all about the money, it is going to feel uncomfortable and awkward. When we focus on the donor and their desires, their interests, and our connection with them, it's not as awkward. Because if you're trying to give that person the opportunity to fulfill their philanthropic desire, in other words, you're trying to give them the opportunity to make a donation that's going to change a life, that actually makes them feel really good. Yes, the byproduct is you raise money so that you can do the work your organization does, but your donor gets to feel amazing. So one of the things that I want to point out here is that you already know an awful lot about relationships. Exhibit A. What is happening in this picture? Some of you are going like, well, it looks like they just got married, or maybe they're about to get married, or something's happening. Probably so. So let me ask you this question. Do you think she wore that dress on their first date? I can almost hear everybody giggling through the webinar. Of course she didn't wear that dress on their first date. What
He would ran the
happened?
other direction. I had to point that out.
It could have been headed. I mean, that would be a big assumption on her part, right? So what happens between the day that they first met and this day where they're making a very deep commitment to one another? What happened? And if you're thinking, oh, well, they probably dated. Yeah, that's what I would guess too. And that's what we do, right? In these relationships with our significant other, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out if it's the right person. Do we like this person? Do we have things in common? We spend a lot of time doing things like going to the movies or going to a baseball game or just hanging out together to figure out if we think this is going to work out, if we like the person. We spend time getting to know them and finding out what we have in common. Well, here's the deal. It's actually the same way with your donors. The difference is in a relationship like this with a best friend or a spouse, it's happening organically. It happens very naturally and we don't notice it. With a donor, we're doing it on purpose. And that's the only difference, really. You're still trying to get to know them. You want them to get to know your organization, maybe you personally, but your organization, you want to find out what really excites them about what your organization does. And that's when you can start to make some magic happen. Now, in full disclosure, this is actually a picture from my daughter's wedding 2 years ago. And it was such a beautiful day and a beautiful photo. I had to find a way to work it in. I know everybody just said, "Oh." Okay, here's another way to think about this. And I think this will be illuminating for some of you. I want you to imagine that for each donor that you have, each supporter for your organization, you have a relationship account, and it's represented by this little green piggy bank. Every time that you make the donor feel good about supporting your organization, you make them feel good about a donation they've given, you make them feel warm inside, you are adding a deposit into that account. Every time you ask them for something, you ask them for money, you ask them to volunteer, you ask them to click on something, you ask them to use Amazon Smile, you're making a withdrawal. Now, you don't have to be an accountant to know that if that needle goes from full all the way down to E, all the way down to empty, that account is going to close. So what we don't often think about, a lot of folks, especially who are really new, you forget that the relationship with a donor is a two-way street. It's not just about asking for money and them giving money and then you thanking them, which actually completes the cycle of giving, but it's also about what happens in between the asks. You see, I think really that's where fundraising happens. It's not what you do to ask, it's what happens in between. It's when you're sending out a newsletter that warms their heart, when you send out a video update that shows your program in action and it makes them go, "Oh, I love that. Or, that nonprofit is amazing. They do such good work." And then they start sharing it on social media. So we have to maintain that positive balance in the account or that account closes. Nurturing your donors is part of what's going to add the deposits. So if you really take this to heart and you decide, I'm going to do this donor nurture thing, I'm going to figure this out for my organization and for me, and I'm going to do what I need to do. Okay, here's another really interesting piece of this. It's kind of a funny little graph, but what I want you to imagine is that down in the bottom left corner, you have low giving and low nurture. And as the nurture increases, so does the giving. So the more nurturing activities you do with donors, the more they're going to give, either in a single gift or the more often they're going to give. What does that look like in practical terms? That means you have to pay attention to how they feel. It's not all about you and your need to make budget. It's not about your need to keep the lights on. It's not about your need to hit your fundraising goals. I mean, internally it is, but you also have to think about the donors need to feel good. And that's where the nurturing really, really kicks in. Okay, some of you are probably thinking, okay, so what exactly is nurturing? Nurturing a donor is about building trust. People give to organizations that they trust. You want to give donors what I call the feels. They've got to feel something. For most organizations, that feels is about empathy or sympathy, it's compassion, it's caring and concern. For some organizations, it's anger and the feeling of injustice. It just depends on what your mission is. But you got to get them to feel something. The more they feel, the more strongly they feel about whatever your cause is, the more they're going to get involved. And that's the next thing. People who are passionate about your organization are going to want to get involved. That might look like volunteering, or it might look like being more of an advocate for you on social media. It might look like telling their friends about your organization. And listen, if you've ever had that situation where a donor or a volunteer shows up with 2 or 3 friends in tow to your event or to an open house or just on a volunteer day, that's a really cool thing. When they're bringing their friends, all of a sudden you have more supporters. There's more going on. Really, in my opinion, I think nurturing donors is about becoming their favorite. If you don't know this, you might want to jot this down. Most donors give to anywhere between 3 and 5 nonprofits at any given time. So your donors are also giving to other nonprofits right now. Your job is to become their favorite. And if you can do that, then if they have something that happens in their life and they have to reduce their giving, they're going to reduce their giving to other organizations, but not to you because you're their favorite. See how that works? It's a pretty cool thing. All right, let's get you involved again. I'm curious, how well are you nurturing donors right now? So Bradley has another poll he's going to put up.
Okay, so that just launched. So looks like we've got a couple people responding here. Again, make sure you pick and also hit submit so that they will come through. If you don't hit submit, then we won't see them. So it looks like we've got just a handful of people. We'll leave this one up for just a few more minutes and we'll go ahead and close it out. Now they're rolling in.
There we go. So choose
Sandy,
between, yeah, go ahead and choose
oh,
between
sorry.
either.
Um, and Sandy, while they're responding to this, one of the things, I love that you said there's, we work with a lot of organizations that, really take on some of the most evil things in the world, like sex trafficking and stuff like that, and I think that one of the points you made there is that sometimes it is anger and things like that bring people to their donation,
Mm-hmm,
and I think I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on, how you balance that with like results, right? How you
mm-hmm,
get people to move when the topic isn't, let's say, animal rescue, which that can be an anger thing also, right? But
mm-hmm,
like you can also show like cute puppies and stuff like that. But there's so many of these organizations that are taking on just these really, really um, major topics, right?
mm-hmm.
I'm going to share the results here, but no, I'm kind of jumping back and forth. But that's
No,
something
it's
that
okay.
I think is such a balance, to try to figure out how to handle, not being too negative, but being bringing the facts as to what's going on. It's just something I'm really intrigued about, right? Is how do you do that in a really healthy way?
Yeah, so there's actually a book by a guy named Donald Miller who there is actually there in Nashville. If you guys don't know Donald Miller, it's called Building a Story Brand. And one of the things that Donald Miller says that I think is very appropriate in this situation is that if you can get people kind of galvanized against an enemy, you can get them to take the action you want them to take. And in the case of sex trafficking, the enemy is injustice. It's about getting people to agree that it is not okay what's happening to people in this world today. It is not okay what's happening to young girls or children or whoever it's happening to. And if you word your messaging that way and get people agreeing with you that, yeah, that's not right. It is not okay for this to happen. And then you can say, and if you want to help us change this, then, and then throw your call to action in. That is a way to use that anger and injustice to get people to take the action.
Yeah, I love Donald Miller, and I think I love the way you put that too. That it's against the injustice, right? Like I
Yeah,
really so. But
yeah.
yeah, back to the poll here real quick. Like it looks like 72% of people. This doesn't surprise me at all. Are doing some things right, but have plenty of room to improve. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. For the 4% of you who are doing great, I'm going to invite you to come help me teach this the rest of the afternoon. And for the 24% of you who say, yikes, we're not doing so hot, it's okay. Today is a new day. You can draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, we're going to do it different from today forward. And I think there's going to be a nugget for everybody. Either you're going to learn something, or for the 4% of you who are doing great, you're going to get affirmation that you're doing great and you need to keep going. Um, so thanks everybody for participating in that. Okay, let's talk about some practical, tactical stuff. I love giving people ideas that they can use right away. So if you've not already gotten an aha, if you haven't already gotten a nugget, you're about to. So get your pens ready. So we're going to talk about nurturing and communications through segmentation, and what about nurturing major donors? Let's start with nurturing through communications. What am I really talking about here? Mostly email. I think that's what most of everybody uses, whether you're sending out a solo email, engaging people in the work your organization is doing, or it's an email newsletter, or it's an email appeal, maybe even social media. That's also a communication. If you're doing a print newsletter, yay, bless you. Actually, I know of some people who are doing real well these days with print newsletters, mostly because nobody else is doing that, and it's a great way to connect with certain donors. So let's talk about all these different kinds of communications and how you nurture people while you're doing that. Now, the first thing is, I realize that everybody's super busy. That came up in an earlier poll. People just don't have time. But in this case, you have to be able to hit the pause button long enough to think about who you're communicating with and what they most want to know. So this is not about you cramming stuff into something and calling it a newsletter just so you can send it out and mark it off your to-do list. This is about making sure that you are connecting with people through email in a way that warms their heart. So I invite you to go back and have a really tough look at your newsletters, your emails, your social media, and think, if you were your donor, how would you receive that? Would you be interested in that? Would you think it is good? Would you think it's crap? What would you think? I receive a lot of email communications from organizations that I support and organizations that I work with, and the ones that I work with know that I will do this. I'm going to surprise some of the others one day, but I will literally hit reply and say, next time you need to do this and this instead. I'm doing coaching on the fly with email communications because I want them to be stronger. I think that if, as a donor, if you can make me feel good, if you can interrupt my day with an email and give me a reason to care about what you're doing, I'm going to be more likely to respond the next time you need something from me. So what you have to do is really remember the content on all this communication. And if you do these things, it makes your donors feel good. And again, the biggest problem here is that people are busy and you're just cramming everything you can into a piece you're sending out. You don't think about how's the donor going to feel when they read this, and what's the donor's motivation for responding and doing the thing we want them to do. So we have to keep it very, very donor focused. If you are not giving to another organization and having the experience of being a donor, you need to. You need to know what that feels like to receive a newsletter from an organization and roll your eyes because you're like, here we go again. It's going to be all about the organization and nothing that's going to make me feel good. Or to give to an organization that hits it out of the park every time. Both will inspire you to do something different and better. So keep it donor focused, keep it very relevant to the donor. You got to be careful about using jargon and insider language and acronyms and anything that can make the donor feel like an outsider. Because I'm telling you, the minute that you make them feel like they don't know what's going on or they're not part of the inner circle, they're out. They're going to tap out and they're going to stop giving. So you have to really watch the language and make it very relevant for your donor. What do they understand about your organization? Don't talk to them in depth about programs if they don't know what your programs are, if they're still trying to figure out exactly what your mission is. Keep it really short and be very consistent about your communications. Consistency, I think, trumps a lot of things because you can almost train people to look forward to getting something from you. I've got a client that works in horse rescue in New Hampshire, and she's incredibly consistent with her newsletter. It's super short. It literally has about 4 different sections in it. I can read her newsletter in about 30 seconds or less, and I'm not kidding. It's very short, and it always makes me feel good because it's very donor focused. She's always telling the story about a horse that they have rescued or given an update on one that they've talked about on social media, and I love it. It hits the mark. And you know what? It hits the mark with all of her donors, as evidenced in the increase in giving that we see year after year with her very small organization. So how do you start to integrate the nurture activities with the email? Well, just told you a whole lot of stuff. You make it very relevant for them. You give donors what they want. But then I want to talk about some of the tool side of this concept. So if you're using Kindful or if you're using another donor tracking software, being able to watch what's happening can be super helpful. You do want to be able to use a tool that integrates, like Kindful integrates beautifully with email. I just talked to 2 of my clients last week. One uses Kindful and Emma, and the other uses Kindful and MailChimp, and they both said what they love about it is they don't have to do dual data entry, and they can track a lot of detail. So Chris, my client, was telling me that in Emma, he can see open rates and click-throughs and stuff like that, but then we can go over into Kindful and pull up a specific donor record, and we can look and see what has that donor engaged with. What emails have they opened? What have they clicked on? What do they seem to be interested in? And that is something you want to pay attention to. So let's say that your organization is about fighting hunger. You have a food pantry or a food bank, and inside of that, you have a program that feeds kids. And you've sent out 2 or 3 emails or newsletters that are really focused on kids, and you start to notice you have donors who are opening consistently the emails that are about kids. Can you do something with that information? Yes, you can. That's telling us that either they don't have time to read the other stuff or they're not interested in the other stuff, and what they're really interested in is your kids' programs. Now we're starting to pay attention to our donors, and we can nurture that differently. So if we find out, and we're going to talk about this more in the segmentation part, if you start to notice that people are paying attention to certain things, you can engage with them and give them more meaningful information about that specific topic. So being able to look at the tech side of your interactions with people, you can spot trends and figure out what people really care about.
So, Sandy, if you don't mind me jumping in here,
I thought you might.
well, I mean, two reasons. One is I used to work for Emma, so I'm an email kind of geek, and then also, this is just a place that's near and dear to my heart because I think every year someone comes out and says email is dying, and every year we find out that it's not, and that so many people. We did a survey not too long ago, and it was the #1 online way people are still raising funds online with Trump's social media, Trump's websites. Like it is the way that people are raising money online. So if you're not, really thinking about your email strategy, I think you really should, right? And I know you're going to talk a little bit more about segmentation, and I'll probably have a couple comments there too. But one of the things about opens, so Jared DeLong is one of our onboarding manager. And this to me was one of the simplest things. He used to work for an organization here in Nashville called Both Hands that supports families with adoption. And one of the things he said he used to do was by tracking opens was that what he would notice is that only about 20% of people would open his emails, which is a phenomenal open rate. But that means 80% of people, and they had a list, I think, about 10,000. So 8,000 weren't open in his emails. So what he would do is about a week after he sent like a big update email or something like that, let's say to their total database, he would send the exact same email again, only to the people who hadn't opened with a new subject line. And because they never saw the first email. And a week later, it's buried in their inbox, right? And so they're likely never going to open it again. And so I thought that was just such a simple kind of hack to email. And he would get like another 20% of people to open with another subject line. So it was just a really great way for him to use the data in a super simple way and get be careful, double the benefit from the one email. So
I think that's absolutely brilliant. That's a great idea, and very similar back in the day when I was doing really heavy direct mail at the food bank. We would do a very similar thing. Like we'd send an appeal, and then if we had people who didn't respond, we would send the exact same appeal again, like a month later, and give them another opportunity to give, and we would pick up a significant more number of gifts. And I hear what you're saying about the email. We've actually done that ourselves internally here, and you do get a lot more people who respond. And I think you have to remember, everybody has to remember that the day that your email hits, and it doesn't matter what kind of email it is, you don't know what's going on in the life of the person who received it. They could have just come back from vacation and have like literally 500 messages in their inbox, and they're just not going to read anything from any of their favorite charities, or they could have just had something happen in their life, gotten a promotion. Like there's no telling what has happened that they're not reading it. So sending it another time with a different subject line is a great idea. You have nothing to lose.
Yeah, and so I think we got an interesting comment, and I would love to see how you respond to this. So, someone said this is part of what seems manipulative. It's like everything we do is focused on raising funds. We're developing relationships simply to get money. So, what's your thoughts about that? I mean, I back to your point that I have talked to some people in the industry that also thinks that you are kind of manipulating people. But what's your thoughts kind of to that comment of when people feel that way?
Manipulation comes from intent. So if your intent is to just get the money and you don't really care about the donor, then yeah, that can be manipulative. If you're raising money and you truly care about those you're trying to help, and you truly care about your donors, and you start to see them as partners in your work, not just checkbooks or ATMs, it can change things. So for me, it's all about intent. It's where you're coming from. It's what the end result is. And I've always been the kind of person that I want my donors to have a great experience. I want them I want them to go to a cocktail party this weekend and talk about the amazing thank you letter that they got from my organization this week, or to see their friends at their kids' soccer games and talk about the amazing experience they had volunteering with us last week. And I think if you focus on giving people a good experience, you care about them, you truly care about them, not just their money. It doesn't have to be manipulative. It's more about it's about being partners in the work.
Yeah, I think that's a good response. And I think that you can kind of view that for any type of business, right? Like, I think the thing that I think about a lot is that raising funds is what fuels your mission. And going back to your one of your initial slides is that if you raise more funds, you can do more good, right?
Absolutely.
And that sometimes that may not feel wonderful, but if you focus on the fact that you're every time someone gives you a donation, that likely that person is giving it because they support the work you do and they want you to see do more of it. That's a really healthy place to be, right?
Yes, it really is.
But at the same time, this is another thing that Donald Miller says: without a call to action, without people being called to action, they will not take action. And so you have to give them that call to action that is clear and compelling to have someone actually take the action, right?
Yes. They will not work hard enough to figure it out for themselves. That's true. So true. Well, let's move on into segmentation, because I think there's more here that's going to be super helpful to those who are having questions and might be a little confused. Segmentation can sound a little confusing and complicated if you've never done it before, but it's basically about just putting people into groups. That's really all we're talking about here, so that you can get people who have similar interests into a similar group, if you will, so that you can communicate with them in a real specific way. If you have ever bought anything on Amazon, you know that they always offer you at the bottom, there's a little list of things that other people who bought this thing also looked at these things. So they're offering you something else that might be helpful in your life. We might also think of it as they're trying to upsell you to another thing. But how many of us have clicked on those things? How many of us have been like, oh yeah, I want to see that too, and we click on it? It is helpful. So segmentation is about being able to communicate with people some things that are interesting to them that may not be interesting to other donors in your donor base. So in other words, you got to separate the cat people from the dog people. And honest to Pete, some of my animal rescue clients, like, we have to do this because all of them have, and if any of you work in the animal rescue world, you know what I'm talking about here. You have people they're cat people. They are all about the cats. They will give you money all day long to help cats. They will adopt cats. They will foster. They will volunteer. But do not ask them to do anything in the dog kennels, because they're not going to do it. And vice versa. So when you can separate your cat people from your dog people, you can give folks only the information that they want. And that can sound a little complicated until you do it the first couple of times, and then you're like, oh no, this is really pretty easy. This is pretty easy. That could look like having a newsletter that has an article about a dog, and you send that one to your dog people, and then you swap out an article about a cat and you send that to your cat people. Now, that's going to take you a little bit more work to do that, but think about the benefit. Think about the result. You're going to be making your cat people and your dog people super happy, because they're not reading something that they don't care about. They're reading only those things that are of interest to them. Now, of course, when you start doing that, if you do work in animal rescue, then you're going to get the bunny rabbit people who are going to say, well, where's the bunny rabbit story? Or the horse people who are going to raise their hand and say, I didn't see a story about a horse. So, be ready for that. It does help you laser focus your communications, though, and make sure that people are getting exactly what they're interested in. Then you can manage and measure your efforts better. So if you're able to segment, and I think this would work really, really well with an appeal, if you know who your cat people are and your dog people, and you send out an appeal for money, then put the right story in the right letter, you're probably going to see a higher response rate, a higher average gift size, and you're going to raise more money overall just because you're giving people exactly what they want. And that's really the big benefit of segmentation. Does it require you to stop and think about it? Yes, it does. You have to be strategic about it. You cannot shoot from the hip and make this work. And what I like about Kindful is it has all different kinds of, you've got room to have as many groups as you want to put people in different little subgroups, just depending on their interaction. So let me show you a few that I was thinking about, and then I know Bradley's going to have some thoughts about this as well. So there might be reasons for you to want to talk to active donors, maybe only people who have given in the last year or so. Maybe you want to segment out your monthly donors so that you can make sure that they're getting a really nice warm touch every month. I was literally just talking with a client about this morning, about what that can look like for their organization, so that they're having that really warm touch base every month with their monthly donors to show their appreciation. You might want to segment out lapsed donors, so people who have not given in the last 12 months. They've given at some point in the past, but not in the last 12 months. You might want a slightly different message in an appeal or in a newsletter. Volunteers might be different, sponsors, event attendees, program participants, and we can go on and on and on and on, just depending on your organization. But when you start to think about those people in groups and what their needs are, your communications can be a lot more personal. And remember, we were talking about that earlier, that's something that makes you feel a little uncomfortable. And it's hard when you start to get a lot of donors. When you can segment them together based on things they're interested in or things they have in common, it's easier to personalize the message because you know more about those people in that group. Bradley, what do you think?
Yeah, so I have three things I would love to add to this. Sorry, love segmentation. I think it's the most valuable thing you can do as a marketer or fundraiser, is especially when you get into large lists, right? When you get to where things are getting hard to have a personal relationship, this is how you stay personal, right? And so first thing is, I think, like, I would also layer on kind of like the idea of where are they at in the process, right? So like what you send a new donor, let's just talk about donors, but you could also do this for volunteers or sponsors or event attendees, right? Like if you think about, like, what is the message? We call this the donor life cycle, but what is the message, or what messages would you send someone when they first give your donation versus someone who's given to you the last 5 years in a row, right? They may be similar, or I mean, they may be very different, right? Like someone who is given just the first time or is just a new volunteer, you're just trying to get them engaged, right? And stuff like that. And so I think there's some real things to think about there. Secondly, is that I wouldn't overthink this. Like so many of these things, you can write one big email or one communication, and then go back through and say, okay, I'm going to write it for all my donors or a certain group of donors. But going back to cat and dog people, I'm going to go ahead and write it for the dog people. But then how do I change it for the cat people, right? All I got to do is change out these couple words. So it doesn't have to be like a huge event to do 7 different versions of an email, right?
Right.
And then
right.
lastly, I would not overthink your groups, right? I would pick your 2, 3, 4 that are your main segments, because it does get hard to get into 7, 8, 10 different segments and think about writing emails for all of those. But just thinking about a few key ones that will make people feel like, okay, you understand me, right? And like it might be easy just to start with different programs. And I'm sorry, I'm going to add in a fourth about lapsed donor. I don't want to let this go. You made the comment. We talk to so many people who don't focus on a rolling 12 months to look at their lapsed donors. That instead they're looking like at the end of the year. So like
mistake. Yeah, big
and they
mistake.
would be looking back into who didn't give in 2018 that gave in 2017. And I think like that to me is one of the biggest things, is making sure that you understand that there's likely some sort of cycle that people give on, that's something important in their life, or something like that. And so for like an animal rescue, maybe the that they're memorializing, a dog that passed away or something. And every year that time they feel compelled to give, or something. I don't know, but really paying attention to a rolling 12 months. Who hasn't given this month that gave this month last year or the year or the month before, and really making sure that you jump right on them on that. So sorry to
Completely agree. No, that's great advice on the lapsed donors, and I completely agree. I used to do something similar where every month I would pull a list of everybody who hadn't given in the last 12 months, and I had a strategy for sending them. I written a script for a handwritten note card, and I made it as personal as I could, and then I had an army of volunteers who would help me write those. And certain times of the year, I needed an army of volunteers because it was a lot of people. That's a great idea.
and
I think sometimes you segment as you need to. So it's not, I agree with you that having 8 or 10 or 12 segments can be overwhelming, except sometimes you segment people because there's a reason to, because as you said, you want to change something up about your appeal or about your communications.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And then someone else just asked this, and I think it's something else I was thinking about is how do we segment for event attendance if we don't have data collected on what events they attended in the past?
Mm,
Could we use something like a questionnaire? And I think I will just say, like, I love the idea of asking people direct questions and maybe sending out a survey or doing something and saying, hey, we want to provide information that's most relevant to you or something like that. But as long as you make it about them, I have found that people are very willing to answer that type of information.
hmm Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You can survey, and then you can also just say, well, we need to make sure that we're tracking data going forward in such a way that we have what we're looking for in
Yeah.
terms of that. I think for some things, it's as simple as who bought a ticket last year for the event and who didn't, who bought an early bird ticket, who waited till the last minute, who bought a sponsorship or bought a full table. So sometimes you can segment people that way in order to reach out to them and say, hey, our event's coming up again. Did you want to buy an early bird ticket again, or did you want to buy a full table, or whatever that looks like? Good stuff. I had a couple of examples that I wanted to throw in here that are other reasons why you might want to segment people. I have a lot of folks who are working on monthly giving. I think monthly giving is hot. It's a great way to create some predictable revenue for your organization. And if you can, here's a way where you could use a tool like Kindful to go pull a report of anybody who's given 3 or more times in the past year. Those people are usually good candidates for monthly giving. So you can pull that report, create a group, put those people in it for a minute if you want to do that, and then send them something really warm to invite them to take the next step. They're already giving frequently, and invite them to take the next step to become a monthly donor. Now you have to have a really, really good reason to motivate them to take that step. So it can't just be, hey, give monthly so we can make our budget, because that's not going to work. But you could invite them to um, you become a monthly donor so that they can sponsor a family in your program, which means that family is going to get the education and the case support they need to work themselves out of homelessness, whatever that looks like for your program. So once you start thinking about those folks, then you have to, again, stop long enough to think and be strategic about how you would identify and nurture them. And it might be as simple as, okay, we've got this group of people that we've identified who are good candidates for monthly giving. We're going to take them out of the regular appeal stream. So they're not going to get appeals here for the next 3 months or 4 months or whatever. And we're going to do something slightly different with these folks. And you lay out what that communication sequence is going to look like for just that group of people, knowing that everything is building them, building their desire to become a monthly donor for your organization.
If I can add, I think this is a really great thing to do also for lapsed donors who
Mm-hmm.
have
Yes.
given multiple times in the past. And so you may
Yes.
not want to do it for just someone who's only given once, but let's say someone who's given $1,000 repeatedly, 3 years in a row, but they didn't give the fourth year.
Mm-hmm.
Offering a monthly plan or option may be a more suitable way for them to give based on their budget, right? And so I think that is always a really great opportunity to ask for an ask that way versus just asking them to give again.
Yes. 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 And lapsed donors, especially if they've given if they've given really frequently or really big in the past, you definitely need a slightly different message for them because you want to really honor that all that support that they gave you years ago, and gently invite them to come renew their support of your work. Just remind them gently that this matters to them. And you never know what's going on in somebody's life unless you have conversation with them. You don't know. Okay, another example. People who have given every year for the past 5 or more years are good candidates for planned giving. So if you're just getting started with a planned giving program, and that would be a good way to do to put together a list of prospects. Just have a look and see people who have given fairly consistently in the past 5 years. How do you identify and nurture them? And again, it might be as simple as thinking about what messaging you want them to get, and how often you want them to get it, how you want them to feel, how you present this concept, which is, for some people, that's a little uncomfortable. I realize you're talking with a donor about their death, and it can be a little uncomfortable. But the point here is you have ways of segmenting some of these people out and having a conversation with them, even if you have like 500 people here that you identify as planned giving prospects, and you're emailing with them, you can still do it in a way that makes it feel personal to them. Another one, this was always my favorite, is people who show an interest in a specific program might be able to help you fully fund that program. So depending on different programs that you have, you may have donors that really seem to laser in on one program or another. And if you can segment them out and laser focus the communications that you give them so that they're getting stories about the thing that really matters to them, they're going to keep giving. And I'll have to tell this story real quick. When I was at the food bank, we had this doctor. He was an anesthesiologist. His name was Dr. Skip. And he would give very large donations a couple of times a year. So for me at that time, a $5,000 gift was a large donation. And he would do that a couple of times a year. And I started offering, because I heard it in a workshop, like, invite your donors to come for a tour of your facility. If you have a facility that works, do that. So I put it in the thank you letter. It was just sort of an afterthought at the bottom of the thank you letter. Hey, by the way, if you'd ever like a personal tour, give me a call. I'd be happy to show you around. So he called and said, I'd love to. And he came, brought his wife, started asking a lot of questions, and he lasered in on one of our kids' programs. He was asking all kinds of questions. How many kids do you serve? And what's the need? And how does this work? And how is it funded? Which is usually the magic question. And then he asked, what does it cost you to completely pay for this program? And I told him, I think it was like $15,000 at the time. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out his wallet and he handed me his credit card and he said, go run it. Right there on the spot. 15 grand for the kids program was fully funded for the year. It was crazy. Thank goodness I had the wherewithal to keep him personally updated about what was happening with that program. So about once every other month or so, I would either call him or I would send him a handwritten letter just to give him an update on what was happening. And the next year when it rolled around, I called him and I said, hey, thank you so much for all your support. I really appreciate your sponsorship of the program. It's time to renew that. And I just wanted to see if you're interested in doing it again. And of course, he said yes. And I didn't even realize at the time that what I was doing was nurturing that relationship by giving him the very personal updates on what was going on with that program. And that kind of stuff means a lot to people. It makes donors feel really special. And plus, it was building trust with him. He knew that we were doing a good job with that program, which was really cool. We've given you some ideas to think about here, but definitely in Kindful, you can create groups, you can pull reports to find different segments. There's so many ways to do this that really you have to start thinking about what's possible. Where are you right now in the way that you're developing donors? What's coming up next for you? What would make the most sense for you? What's a group of people that you would love to be able to communicate with specifically without that one message going to everybody? And that's what you really want to think about. So I'm watching the time, we still have another huge piece here to talk about, and that is how to nurture the big givers. So I want to give you a couple of really big nuggets here. There, in my opinion, two kinds of big givers you're looking for. You have those that self-identify. In other words, like Dr. Skip, they're going to write you a check for $5,000 when nobody else is doing that. And then you have the Easter eggs, the ones that are hiding. How do you work with and nurture both of those kinds of donors? Your self-identifiers are giving larger than average gifts, sometimes hard to engage. You've probably had that experience where you send them an email or you call them and ask for a meeting and they just won't respond. Sometimes that's the way it happens. Sometimes you might need to find a board member who knows that person because they might respond better peer-to-peer. They do require individualized nurture plans. So you're going to have to really think about that major donor and how you want to engage with them one-on-one. You have to think about what matters to them. What are they interested in? What does their time look like? How do you engage with those folks? So we have one last poll that we'll do here real quick. Bradley, if you'll throw that one up, just to find out how many major donors that are self-identifying, well, the ones you know about, how many major donors do you have right now? We'll give you a second to respond to that one.
Yeah, just again, just make sure you pick which one applies to you and then hit the submit button. Looks like we've got some results rolling in. We're not going to leave this one up quite as long, just from standpoint of we're running a little tight on time here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, Sandy, and let you respond to the
Alrighty.
results.
Okay, I'm not surprised. Half of you, 53% say you have 10 or less, 19% 11 to 25, 13% in the 51 plus. That was probably the 4% of people who said, I got this all figured out. And then 16% of you say, I don't have any idea. Okay, so I'm going to challenge those of you who don't have any idea to go back and pull a report, find out. You need to know who your major donor prospects are, because if they call you, if they call your office, if they stop by, you need to know who they are so that you can really pay attention and pick up any little clues that tell you about who they are. Because the more that you can figure out what they like, the better you can nurture them. And you can start to use those little clues to tell you more about what their capability is. So I was talking with both my clients last week about the wealth identification tool that's in Kindful, which I think is very cool. I remember 20 years ago, I had to pay $2,500. It was basically $1 a record with a minimum 2,500 records to get this kind of information. For those of you who are not familiar, the wealth identification tool basically is it's a curated access to all kinds of public information, and they compare your donor records against all this wealth identification screening to tell you who's giving to your organization now who might be capable of giving a much larger gift. My client Chris is out in California, and we just looked in his Kindful account, and he has oh, Bradley, I didn't tell you this. He has 1,000 people who are categorized as capable of giving a $50,000 gift or bigger. 1,000 people. I'm like, Chris, dude, don't you want to find out who they are and start building those relationships? Like, aren't you curious at all? And his thought was, because he's doing really well, he follows the Get Fully Funded system, he actually is cash flush right now. He needs people more than he needs money, which is very interesting. And he said, we've got a capital campaign coming up in a couple of years, and I think that what I want to do is wait until we're ready to embark on that, and then I want to find out who those people are and start nurturing them, which I thought, that makes a lot of sense too. I can get on board with that. But he's in a unique situation where he has a fully funded budget. He doesn't need to go really beat the bushes to raise money, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we hear about all the time, and so much of this content addresses it, is that people, sometimes don't know what to do with that information, and so I think, Sandy, I would hope in the future maybe we'll be able to do a little bit more to talk about when you do identify, and maybe that's about what you're about to go through. When you identify that someone has the capacity or may have the capacity, I think, like, how do you go about without going to them and saying, hey, I know that you may be able to give a lot of money. How do you go and start to build a relationship with them that's more organic?
Well, one of the things that I tell my students and clients all the time is, until you know different, you treat everybody as if they're capable of making a game-changing gift. And the truth is, with people like these Easter eggs, you don't know. They might have some big assets, but they're not liquid assets. It's not where they can give you a big donation. Or you might even have other people who are capable of big gifts. But the truth is, if we had all the time in the world, we would cultivate every possible donor and make them feel really good about partnering with our organization. And it's following these same basic steps. It's about building trust, which means you got to stay in communication. You've got to have consistent communication to build trust. It's about getting to know them and what they're interested in and figuring out what their hot button is. Like with Dr. Skip, his hot button was kids programs. And once I figured that out, I was able to go back to him with another kids program that we had and say, hey, do you have any interest in this? It is a lot about customizing and personalizing, which takes a little more time. So for those of you who are drowning in the to-do every day, you've got all kinds of stuff going on, you got to find a way to offload something so that you can pay attention to how you want to personalize, even if it's simply handwriting a letter or handwriting a note or shooting a personalized video occasionally, just to let that donor know that, hey, I see you. I know you're there. I appreciate you. We couldn't do this without you. You help make this possible. You definitely want to track activities and next steps. And this is where I think a good tool like Kindful can be amazing for you to be able to look back and see, what are they opening? What are they clicking through? What events have they attended? What appeals did they give to? But then also, when you start to map out a personalized nurture plan, where maybe you think, okay, I'm going to call and invite them to lunch, or I'm going to email them and invite them for a personalized tour, and then I'm going to, whatever your next steps are, whatever that series of events is that you want to do with that donor, you can start to document that in their record, and then you don't guess. You're never guessing about what you should do next. You can pre-think it and then customize it as you go, because even if you laid out a nurture plan that you wanted to use with a lot of donors, every donor is different and their timetable is different than your timetable, and you have to customize, especially for your major donor prospects. You just have to. All right, so one other thing, a set of things you can do is when you do identify those people who potentially can be bigger donors, ask if a board member knows them, because again, a peer-to-peer conversation can be really helpful. Personal meetings, video calls if people are not in your area. I know some people work in Tennessee and they have clients all over, or donors all over the country. You can do video calls. Get really, really curious, asking lots of open-ended questions. Really, your job as a fundraiser is to get your donors talking. You want to find out what they care about, and you can't listen and talk at the same time. So you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them accordingly to find out what makes your donors tick. You can drip out an educational sequence, like maybe you do a 3-part video series that each one of the videos is 2 or 3 minutes, and you send that little video campaign dripped out to let people know what your organization is up to. And finally, one of the very best things you can do is ask for their advice. Tell them what's happening at your organization or what your organization is thinking about, and ask them what they think. People love to tell you what their opinion is. And so it's really a good way to engage folks. Yeah, so I think bottom line here is nurturing actually is not as hard as it sounds like. Don't make it hard. You're probably already doing a lot of it right. You're probably already moving in the right direction. Just stop long enough to think strategically about where you're trying to go with people. Where are you trying to move donors to? And that will help you a lot. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. I wish we had about 30 more minutes, because I think we could talk even more about nurturing people and really the finer points of Kindful. Just be curious. Always think about, how can I do this? How can I find a way to send real specific messages to the cat people or the dog people? How can I figure out who my best new prospects are? How can I make sure that they're having a great experience? Get curious, ask questions, and go from there. So we did mention early on that we would talk a little bit about the Inspired Fundraising Retreat. It is coming up August 9th and 10th. We're going to actually be going into a lot more detail about this in the context of how you inspire people to give. What do you need to say? How do you create a situation where people fall in love with your organization and they want to give? And we're really excited that Kindful will be there as one of our sponsors for the event. It is August 9th and 10th in Nashville, Tennessee. And for those of you who are local in Tennessee, it's at Hotel Preston, right close to the airport. If you want to come join us, you can use this link. It is www.bit.ly/ifr-kindful. Sorry, I know I was trying to shorten it. That was as short as I could make it and still make sense. And if you do want to come, we have in-person tickets and live stream tickets. You can use the promo code Kindful to save $50. That'll expire on July 22nd. You can come join us. It's a great event. There's usually about 100 people in the room, folks just like you who are doing their best every day to try to raise money for important causes. And you can come join us in person or hop on the live stream and learn how to do things like inspire people to give, inspire them online and in print. We'll be looking at some real specific examples of campaigns that have worked really well this past year. We're going to talk about what donors want from their experience of giving and how you can give it to them, and then how to engage people between the asks. So we'll be looking at all kinds of things around newsletters and updates and things that you probably would get some really good ideas from. So we do have a couple of tickets that we're going to give away just in case anybody's interested. Would anybody like the chance to win a free ticket to this event? By the way, tickets right now are $347. So this is not a cheap event by any stretch. And we wanted to give you the opportunity to win a ticket. So if you are interested, you've got choices of me, I'd love to be there in person, or me, I'd love to join virtually, or no thanks, I'm good. If you're not interested at all.
Yeah, so and I'll just add, so we're really excited to give away these tickets. And we have a couple of our staff members, two of our salespeople, Olivia and Joel, who have both been with the company for over 5 years and have gone to so many different conferences. But they've all said that Sandy's conference is one of the most just give you real life good takeaways that you can go implement in their business. And it's so intimate, everything's in one room. It's not having to go from session to session to session, unless you've changed things, Sandy. But it's
still that. Yep.
Just one spot where you sit down and you get to take in some amazing content. So we'll be picking one individual to go in person and then one to go virtually. So it looks like everyone's got there. I'm going to leave this up for just another second. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to get their responses in there, and we'll be picking from someone. So make sure you've put your answer and hit submit, and we'll pick someone from this list.
This is so exciting. Who's excited to get to win and come join us?
And so just to share, right, we've got a lot of people that want to go virtually, a few, quite a few that would like to be there in person. And so we'll definitely make sure that we get someone picked and let them know tomorrow so you can start making plans.
Very cool. Exciting. So by the way, you guys, if you don't win, you can still join us. You've got the link and you've got a promo code that you can use to save $50. You can either join us live in person or virtually through the live stream. Thank you to the amazing technology that's available to us today. We'd love for you to come join us and be part of the event. I think you'd love it. It's fun. We laugh, we cry, we learn. Everybody goes home supercharged and ready to go back to work.
Great. And Sandy, do you have like 5 minutes to answer a couple of questions we didn't get through? There was like 2 that I just thought were phenomenal, but I didn't get a chance to ask them. Would you?
Yeah, let's do that. We can answer a couple of questions.
And then, everyone who's on, feel free to, stay on and hear some of these questions. If you need to jump off, we completely understand. And so let me find this one that I really thought was great. It was basically, that someone's trying to do a thank you event, and they're having an internal debate. It's going to be a picnic where they're inviting all of their, here it is. So we're coming up on our major thank you event, a picnic. Some board members feel we should not insert an ask as it negates the thank you. She put in parentheses the piggy bank, so she was really paying attention.
She was.
While others say an ask is expected and a lost opportunity. What do you think? What do you land on that?
Well, I think if the event is meant to be a thank you, let it be a thank you and don't ask. And I think there's so much of that happens, and it's very unfortunate. People put together, let's do a thank you picnic, and we get people coming and they're like, we got people here, we need to ask them for money, we need to ask them for volunteers. As a donor, that's exhausting. As a donor, I just want to be acknowledged sometimes. It's almost like getting a thank you letter in the mail, but it has another envelope in it, which to me feels like, why did you bother sending me a thank you? Because you're really just asking me for money again. So I think that you have to really separate those. And if you want, again, it goes back to people and how they feel. If you want people to feel good, let the thank you be a thank you. You've got plenty of other days during the year that you can ask them for money. So do that somewhere else.
Great. I love that advice. I think I aligned with you, but I was going to let you answer that. We had another one that said, would you ever take people off a mailing list? For example, if someone has been on our email list for 7 years, excuse me, and you can see that they have never opened a single email. And so I can
Well,
jump on this one.
yeah.
I would do two things. One is understand that open and click data isn't like accounting data, right? Like it relies on certain things happening, and that there may be some discrepancy in it, right? And so I would potentially take those people who have both not ever opened or clicked an email. So make sure you do both when you segment those people, and I would send them an email and ask them if they want to continue to be on the list. I think what you'll be surprised by is how many people who will respond and actually say that they are consuming the content. And so I would just be careful a little bit with that data, that it is pretty accurate, but it's not foolproof. And so that's my thought there, is that before you remove them, give them a heads up and say, hey, it looks like we haven't heard from you in quite a long time. And so we're going to go ahead and remove you from the list. But it is important to remove people from time to time, because you do, the ESPs out there do pay attention to some of this data to give you basically a sender score. So, you can end up, by having a bunch of people that never open and never engage, you can end up sometimes more likely ending up in someone's spam box. And so I do think keeping your data clean is important, but you just kind of, I think it's worth doing the ask. It looks like you haven't engaged in a while, so we're going to remove you from our list. If we're missing something here, or if you'd like for us to keep you on, please let us know. And then if they say that, then you know that you can keep them on.
I think it's a good idea to do like a 2 or 3 email series. Basically, like, hey, we'd love to stay in touch with you. And then another one that says, if we don't hear from you, we're going to remove you from our list, and then kind of a final notice kind of thing. But yeah, giving people a heads up that you're about to take them off the list. I had somebody tell me once that in programs like Outlook, people can read the email in the preview pane, and that some email trackers don't count that as an opened email if they're reading in a preview pane.
That's true, and it relies on an image loading. And so like Outlook will block images sometimes if it's not a known sender. And so your open data, click data is much more valuable than open data. I'll say that.
Yeah. So I think that the answer there is be careful, but yes, clean it out. If you've got people that haven't done anything in 7 years, I'd say the chances are probably pretty good they're not going to do anything going forward, but definitely give them a chance to raise their hand and say, no, don't delete me.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I think that's all I've got. Sandy, is there any other things you'd like to add in? Any more details or anything? The content has been great today. Thanks so much for spending the time with us. We really, really appreciate it. And there was a lot of questions we weren't able to get to. I'll share these with Sandy, and we'll see if there's some that we can get back to. Some of you had some specific questions about Kindful. I'll make sure that we get back to you on those.
Perfect. I just appreciate everybody being here. I hope you got some good takeaways. And if you want to come join us for more at the Inspired Fundraising Retreat, take advantage of it.
All right. Thanks again, Sandy. Everybody have a great rest of the week, and happy fundraising to everyone.
Okay. Bye, everybody.